Hi, everybody. Welcome back to English 116. This is for our class for Monday, the 7th. So I apologize. I had to post an older video talking about A Midsummer Night's Dream, but I think you've got a sense of some of the major elements of the play to consider. And if I'm correct, I don't think I talked much about Shakespeare's bio. So very quickly, we know very little about Shakespeare. What we do know is mostly from legal documents that's led to a lot of questions about Shakespeare's identity. So if you like conspiracy theories, there are quite a few in terms of who might have written these plays. Was Shakespeare a pseudonym for someone who couldn't reveal their identity? Perhaps a woman, because theater was seen as rather lowbrow and women weren't allowed to be involved. Or perhaps somebody from the royal court, again, because theater was seen as rather lowbrow. In the end, these are just speculations. We don't have any evidence. We've got a dozen or so, or half a dozen or so, authenticated signatures that are all spelled differently. That actually would not have been unusual during Shakespeare's time. Spelling was very fluid, and they didn't have rules in the way we do now, including writing names. The idea of Shakespeare being born and dying on the same day might raise some eyebrows, April 23rd, but again, that's certainly possible. And we do know that Shakespeare didn't attend university, but he attended grammar school, and that might be a bit of an elitist argument that he needed to attend university, but in grammar school, you would learn things like Latin and Greek. So things like birth certificates, death certificates, wills are used to piece together the little bit of information that we know about Shakespeare. But we have the plays, and even those lead to some questions, as well as the sonnets. The sonnets are the poems that would have been written probably during times of plague when the theater houses were shut down. So when we get to the poetry section, we'll talk about the sonnets. The plays, some of them are considered to be, quote, clean, unquote, plays, and that there's very little dispute about what was written, but some of them are known as problem plays because they are just that, problem plays, and usually are not studied at the undergraduate level. And the reason why there are questions about the texts themselves is because texts weren't protected through copyright the way they are today. So there were lots of versions that existed, bootleg versions of these texts. And one of the ways that editors go through Shakespearean plays is that they put together all of the versions that exist, and there's something known as a quarto, which is a printing term, which means four in Spanish, cuatro, where you fold a sheet twice, so it looks like a paperback book. And those would have been produced by perhaps somebody sitting in the audience writing down everything, or one of the bit players, one of the actors, would be hired to reconstruct the play. What is unusual is that 7 years after Shakespeare's death, his contemporaries got together and tried to put together a definitive version. It's known as the folio, which is another printing term where the page is folded just once, so it's a much larger book. Editors look at the folio and any additions that have been unearthed of the quartos, compare and contrast, and try to put together the definitive text. And occasionally you might be reading a Shakespearean text where you will see square brackets. Square brackets are just the insertion of the editor's best guess as to the word that would be there. Occasionally, you're reading footnotes that come with a question mark, and that means that is the editor's best guess as to what the word meant. Words were being created over time. Oftentimes, they were never used again. And Shakespeare, whether people realize it or not, is oftentimes quoted by us all. He's become part of our popular vocabulary. But now his expressions are thought to be rather trite and cliche and overused. So, the theaters would influence how the plays would be performed. And we know that the Globe Theater, which was reconstructed, is known as the Wooden O. It's an outdoor theater, and that would have influenced how performances were done. So performances were done during the daytime, usually, unless they were in an indoor theater like Blackfriars, so that they could take advantage of the natural light. The theaters, if you wanted to see them, in the first section in the notes below where it says Shakespeare, you can see that I've got a few links, one for the reconstructed globe and one for a virtual tour of the globe. Is basically what happened is the globe was torn down after Shakespeare's death by the Puritans, who thought theater was evil. And it was only reconstructed many years later. In the 1970s, an American went on holiday and was stunned to see that the Globe Theater wasn't there, just a plaque. So he, being an actor, bit actor, made it his lifelong mission to have that globe reconstructed using the best scholarship available at the time to be as accurate as possible. Fortunately, he didn't live long enough to actually see the production come to fruition, but he, I think, would be quite proud. And when we talk about different interpretations of A Midsummer Night's Dream, you remember that I showed you a few clips from Shakespeare's reconstructed Globe Theater, just so that you could get a sense of what it was like. The theater houses were attended by everybody, rich and poor, young and old. It was basically the television of the day, if you will. So Shakespeare had to appeal to a lot of different audiences. So you'll see lots of different layers. And very little in the way of props, but very elaborate costumes, because the costumes would oftentimes denote, and clothing would denote social status. It was a very hierarchical society. So based on status, that determined what cloth one would wear, or even what color one would wear. The idea was that there was a chain of being, that everything was ranked in a hierarchy in society. God at the top, and then the angels would follow, and then the king or the queen would be the highest ranked individual on earth. And then, of course, all of the different social statuses would be ranked, man above woman, adult above child, even the animals on earth would be ranked based on status. And that was the philosophy of the time, that you were born into a certain position and that determined your fate. Shakespeare questioned this. Shakespeare questioned lots of things. He just didn't do it in an obvious way. He could be a lot more open about sex and violence, but he had to be quite cautious about political commentary, because it could offend the wrong person and get him into a great deal of trouble. That's not to say he didn't make political commentary. You just have to look beneath the surface to find the political commentary. And oftentimes what he would do is use language to illustrate change of status. So poetry, if a character is speaking in that, is supposed to represent higher status. And if a character is speaking in complete sentences, that could represent lower status. But Shakespeare would mix that up and have a lower level character speak in poetry or vice versa, in part to make commentary about how one could move up and down the chain of being based on temperament and rationality, not necessarily birthright. So thinking about how ultimately the theaters would have influenced the viewing experience, the best seats would have been covered so that there was some protection from the elements, even though it was an open air theater. And then the groundlings, who would be standing in front of the stage on the ground, hence the name groundlings, would have the no seat, so they'd be uncomfortable and exposed to the elements, but they might have the best view of anyone. And now certainly the groundlings have become perhaps the most coveted seats, quote unquote seats, because of course you aren't sitting, because you get such close opportunity to see and sometimes to interact with the characters themselves. So I also included in the notes below, under the first section, a brief video that I think you might find to be amusing. It's about 7-8 minutes long, about Renaissance language, which I know is challenging. The thing with Renaissance language is like knowing a foreign language that you know perhaps 90% of or so. It does get easier as you listen to the rhythms of the language. And of course, your first exposure to Shakespeare, you're struggling with plot. So hopefully you don't have any questions at this point about what happened with plot with A Midsummer Night's Dream. And once you know plot, then you can really appreciate the nuances of language. And to illustrate this point, the clip that I have below, and it's listed as Renaissance language. It's actually a comedy routine about the Three Little Pigs, but in Renaissance language. And I hope you enjoy. It gives you an idea. If you know the story of the three pigs, three houses, one out of straw, one out of wood, one out of brick, and there was a big bad wolf that tried to blow them all down but couldn't blow down the brick one. That's your basic summary of the Three Little Pigs. So I think you'll enjoy this particular presentation about Three Little Pigs in Renaissance language. So paper number 1, I would have returned the first paper to you if you submitted it in by the due date. So if you submitted it in by the due date and I did not return it, please reach out to me. All of the other papers that were submitted to me after the due date, I'm working on them. They are in the queue, or so I like to say. So I'm working on other classes as well. So it might take me a little bit of time, but I will get those back to you. And everybody has the option of rewriting that paper for a higher grade. I just ask that you submit in the revision along with the original copy with my commentary so I can compare and contrast the two before the ending of the semester. So you've got a good amount of time. And while you're working on that, hopefully at this point you have finished or you're close to finish reading A Raisin in the Sun. And you can see in the notes below that is section number 4. A Raisin in the Sun is not included in your textbook, but I ordered it as a separate text and I also have a link. But of course, as you know, we will be watching a production as well. Not that a production is a substitute for reading, and not that reading is a substitute for a production. The production that we are seeing is considered the gold standard for Raisin in the Sun, starring Sidney Poitier, one of the best actors of our time. And the reality is that one of the reasons why it's so great is because the playwright herself, Lorraine Hansberry, worked very closely on the film. So in the 5th section in the notes below, I've got some brief videos for you to see that gives you a little bit of history about the writing of A Raisin in the Sun. One is from American Masters, and it's 3 minutes long. The other talks about a particular production that was done in 2014 with Denzel Washington. And then the cast talks a little bit about their experience from that production. And they specifically talk about race and class. So each of those are about 4 minutes long or so and should give you a good overview before you begin to view Raisin in the Sun. And I'm going to ask you for today to watch the first half of Raisin in the Sun. So up until about minute 55:47. And you can see that this is in the 6th section. And I have included a link. Of course, you can always stream this as well. And you can find the DVD in the GCC library. With an attendance question that would be due Wednesday the 9th. So you probably noticed I've fallen a little bit behind with answering attendance questions because I've been working on papers, but I plan on catching up soon. And the question is, based on your viewing the first part of A Raisin in the Sun, which actor performance, now I'm talking about performance, not necessarily character, did you like best in A Raisin in the Sun, and why? So as you know, you're not required to respond to your classmates, but you are encouraged. You are required to read your classmates' responses and ultimately my responses. And of course, if you need additional time after Wednesday the 9th, just ask me for an extension. I'll be happy to grant it to you. So before I leave you to watch Raisin in the Sun, I just wanted to briefly draw your attention to the 2nd section of the notes, or I'm sorry, the 3rd section in the notes below, and that's about registration. So you are probably aware that the registration period is open now, so you can sign up for classes for both the summer and the fall semester. Summer sessions are highly condensed. They are half as long as the fall. They are 8 weeks rather than 16 weeks. And we divide our summer into 2 summer sessions. The first session starts at the ending of the spring semester and goes until about mid-July. Session begins in mid-July and goes up until the beginning of the fall semester. And we offer fewer classes, obviously, in the summer because there's less demand. But I have found, because I teach in the summer, that classes tend to be small and very motivated. And most of the classes are in an online format, which I think is handy if you do traveling over the summer, though there are a few face-to-face. I've included the link where you can access the schedule, but you can also, the schedule of classes, but you can also find those on the GCC website on the homepage on your own. And I suspect that most of you have one more English class that you need to take. So what we call a 200 level English class, you are in English 116 now, an introduction to literature and film. And what we call a 200 level, the next advanced level, is a focused class on a kind of literature, perhaps based on time period or author or genre. And if you're curious, I am teaching a Women in Literature class during the first summer session. We begin with the text you might know, The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. And in the fall semester, I am teaching Gothic literature. As you know, I'm a fan of the Gothic. Over the summer, second summer session, I'm also teaching a public speaking class. All of these are online, by the way. And I'm also teaching a medium popular culture class. So I've mentioned to you before my horror film class. Not exactly sure if it'll be offered in the fall or not this fall. But there is a class that comes before that that is recommended as a prereq, not required. Medium popular culture that talks about the history of books and magazines and television and ultimately how the internet has basically included all of those and made a whole new media possibility for all of us. And that also is online. So that's CMN 153. So if you've got any questions about those classes, some classes you'll see, if you have any questions, please let me know. And some classes you'll see haven't been staffed yet. So I believe I'm going to be teaching public speaking in the fall semester online. But again, I think you'll see that it's unstaffed at this point. So again, if you've got any questions or concerns about registration, feel free to reach out. Your advisor should have reached out to you, though certainly you can initiate. And you could register either through your advisor or the advising center, or you can ask your advisor for your PIN if your advisor hasn't already supplied the PIN, and then you can ultimately register yourself. So I'm going to leave you with watching those brief introductory videos about A Raisin in the Sun to help prepare you for the performance A Raisin in the Sun, which was done by the director Petrie in 1961, starring Sidney Poitier. So let's see which actor performance you think was the best thus far. I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well, and we will continue on next class. Take care. Bye-bye.